Dana Reyes had known Carl Holt for 2 years, which meant she had known him mostly by his coffee order and the sound of his laugh. Black, no sugar, and the kind of laugh that started in his chest and didn't stop until it found the room. He ran the maintenance crew at Fort Calder the way some men run a family, loud about the small things, quiet about anything that mattered. He fixed the boilers and the generators and the trucks that no one else could bring back from the dead. And he did it for 38 years without once mentioning what any of it cost him. She had heard he was sick in February. By April, the boiler room was quiet. She still reflexively set a mug at the end of the counter on Tuesday mornings because Carl had always come in on Tuesdays, always at 6:15, always with grease on his knuckles that the soap never quite got off all the way. It took her almost 3 weeks to stop doing it. Now it was the first Tuesday in June, and Dana stood at the edge of the base chapel grounds with a pressed collar and her hands folded in front of her, watching the crowd settle in. The army had turned out properly. There were officers in dress blues, NCOs with their covers tucked under their arms, a few old warrant officers who had worked alongside Carl in years she couldn't picture. The chaplain was already at the podium. The flag was folded tight on the table beside the casket, waiting. Dana had expected to feel mostly sad. She felt that. But she also felt a little lost, because she had not known Carl Holt as anything except the man who drank her coffee and told her the same story about a transmission repair in Vicenza 3 times and never noticed. She was 24. She had not known him long enough to know what she had lost. She noticed the woman in the black dress because of the stillness. Everyone else at a military funeral moves in small ways. They adjust their covers, they shift weight, they nod to people they recognize. This woman did none of that. She stood near the left side of the chapel entrance, neither in the crowd nor apart from it, just placed. She was young, younger than Dana had expected. Early 30s maybe, dark hair pulled back. The black dress was plain and her shoes were flat and she held nothing in her hands. No program, no purse, no phone. She was watching the casket the way a person watches something they have already made their peace with. Dana leaned toward Sergeant Polk, who ran the motor pool and had known Carl since the early years. She kept her voice low. "Is that his daughter?" Polk glanced over. "Nora, yeah." He said it the way you say the name of a weather system, something that exists that you've seen before that you don't have much more to say about. "She doesn't come around much. Lives out west, I think. Works with some contractor outfit. Carl never said much about what she did." Dana looked back at the woman, Nora Holt. She was still not moving. The service was proper and measured. The chaplain spoke well. He talked about Carl's 38 years, his gift for getting engines running, his belief that the work underneath a vehicle was as honorable as anything done on top of it. 2 men from the maintenance crew told short stories. One of them cried. Carl's crew chief, a big man named Dobbins who had worked beside Carl for 11 years, read from a piece of paper he had clearly written and rewritten several times. He got through it. Nora Holt watched all of it from where she stood. She did not cry. She did not look away. When the chaplain stepped back to the podium for the final remarks, he paused and looked toward the base commander, Colonel James Whitfield, who was seated in the front row. There was a small exchange of glances. Whitfield stood, straightened his jacket, and came to the podium. He carried Carl Holt's service folder. Dana had seen these before, the thick cream-colored folders that held a career's worth of evaluations and commendations and records. Whitfield set it on the podium and opened it. He turned one page, then another, and then he stopped. He was quiet for a moment. When he looked up, his expression had changed in a way that Dana couldn't quite name. Not grief. Something more like the face of a man who has opened a door and found the room on the other side much larger than he expected. "Carl Holt left one request," Whitfield said. "One. It was handwritten and placed inside his service jacket, and I am told he put it there himself 6 weeks before he passed." The colonel looked down and read it aloud. "Sir, I know my daughter won't say anything. She never does. She didn't say anything when she earned it, and she won't say anything today. I am asking you to read what she did. I am asking you to say her name. She earned it more than anyone in this chapel, and she would let it go to the grave if I left it up to her. So I am not leaving it up to her. Carl Holt, SFC, U.S. Army, retired. The chapel was completely silent. Dana felt the hair rise on the back of her neck. She looked toward Nora Holt, who had not moved. The woman's jaw had tightened just slightly. Her hands were still at her sides. Whitfield turned to the next page in the folder. He looked at it for a moment, then looked at Nora directly, across the length of the chapel. Whatever was in that file, it had put something behind his eyes that was not routine. "Sergeant First Class Nora Holt," he said. In the back row of the chapel, 3 men in army dress green stood up. Dana hadn't noticed them when she came in. She turned now and looked. 3 soldiers older than her, fit and straight-backed, their service ribbons in neat rows on their chests. They stood without being asked. They didn't look at anyone. They looked at Nora. Nora Holt looked back at them, and for the first time since Dana had laid eyes on her, she seemed to be working to hold something in. Whitfield opened the citation and began to read. "For extraordinary heroism and distinguished service in connection with military operations against an opposing armed force. On the night of March 14th, in the course of a 9-month classified joint targeting operation at Firebase DeLand, Sergeant First Class Holt, serving as the operational intelligence lead for a 6-person advisory detachment, received word of a compound collapse and simultaneous hostile engagement that had cut off 14 American and Allied advisors in an outer compound position. Both senior officers were incapacitated. Communications with the forward element had failed. Sergeant First Class Holt assumed command. The room did not move. Under sustained direct fire, Sergeant First Class Holt coordinated a breach and sequential extraction of 14 personnel through a hostile approach corridor. When the evacuation route was compromised, she called a danger close air strike on a position within 80 meters of her own location. Placing herself at direct risk to eliminate the threat and clear the final extraction window, she was the last person out of the compound. All 14 advisors survived. Dana was holding her breath without knowing it. For her actions, Sergeant First Class Nora Holt was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest combat decoration the United States Army can confer. Her citation was sealed at the request of the Operations Classification Authority. Whitfield paused. Her father kept a copy. He looked up from the page. His voice was steady but only just. Her call sign was Ember. The 3 soldiers in the back row came down the aisle. They moved slowly, properly in step, the way soldiers move when they are carrying something. When they reached Nora, they stopped. The one on the left, oldest of the 3, a master sergeant's chevrons on his collar, came to attention and rendered a salute that was so clean and deliberate it seemed to take up more space than a salute usually does. "Ma'am," he said, "nothing else, just that." The one in the middle had a scar along his jaw that had faded to silver. He was blinking, hard. The one on the right was younger, maybe 30, and he was not blinking at all because he did not trust himself to. Every officer in the chapel rose. Not together, not as a formation, not on a command. One by one, the way a field fills with light. Whitfield first from the podium, then the lieutenant colonel in the second row, then the captains, the warrant officers, the NCOs along the wall. Dana watched it happen the way you watch something that you will be unable to fully explain later, only remember. Old Sergeant Major Dobbs, who had patted Nora on the arm when she walked in and said, in that bluff and well-meaning way of his, "Your father was proud of you, miss." Dobbs was the last to stand, and when he did, his hat was in his hands and he was looking at the floor. Nora Holt stood straight through all of it. Her hands came up once, just once, to accept the master sergeant's handshake, and she held it for a moment with both of hers, and then she was still again. She did not look triumphant. She did not look relieved. She looked the way a person looks when something they buried very carefully has finally been allowed to rest properly. Dana Reyes was not a soldier. She was 24 years old, she made coffee and eggs, and she kept the dining facility running on 4 hours of sleep and a lot of goodwill, and she had not seen much of war and did not pretend to understand it. But she understood what was in the room at that moment. She understood it the way you understand something, not through your mind but through the back of your throat, a thickening, a weight, a fullness that does not have a clean name. Carl Holt had fixed engines for 38 years. He had kept the generators running in the summer heat, and the boilers alive in the winter cold, and the trucks moving when they had no business moving. He had done it without asking for recognition, and without expecting it, because he was the kind of man who understood that the work underneath things is as important as the work on top of them. And somewhere, in a compound Dana would never see, on a night she could not imagine, his daughter had understood the same thing. She had done her work underneath the notice of nearly everyone, and she had been content to let it stay there. Carl Holt had decided it would not. Dana thought about the coffee. 2 years of black coffee, no sugar, and Carl's laugh filling the dining facility on winter mornings. She thought about the way he sometimes looked up from his mug toward the door, the way old fathers look toward doors. She understood now what he had been thinking about. The chaplain stepped forward to close the service. The flag was lifted and folded and carried to Nora's hands with the same deliberate care that had been given to every fold, and she received it the way she had received everything else, without flourish, without theater, with both hands and a stillness that had nothing passive in it. Colonel Whitfield said, "On behalf of the United States Army and the soldiers whose lives you preserved, Sergeant First Class Holt, your father was right, and we are honored." She nodded once. Then she looked down at the flag in her hands, and she was quiet for a long moment, and whatever she said to it she said to herself. Dana walked out of the chapel last, after the crowd had broken and the officers had filtered into the June light, and the 3 soldiers had taken their place at Nora's side for the walk to the grave. She stood at the top of the chapel steps and watched them go, the daughter and the men she had brought home, moving through the summer morning together in a silence that did not need to be filled. The sun was up fully now. It cut long and flat across the cemetery grounds, and the grass was still wet from the night before, and the whole base had that particular morning quality where the heat is already there, but the dew hasn't burned off yet, and everything looks washed clean. The kind of morning Carl Holt had probably started 1,000 times, coffee in one hand, going down to the motor pool before anyone else arrived. Dana watched Nora walk and tried to reconcile the 2 images, the still woman in the black dress, and the soldier standing in a compound on the far side of the world on a night that had required something she could not fully picture. She found she could not reconcile them. She thought maybe that was the point. That the woman in the black dress and the soldier in the compound were not 2 different people but one person who had decided, a long time ago, which parts of herself she would spend and which parts she would keep, and had held to that decision without complaint and without a need for anyone's approval. She thought about how she had watched Nora Holt for an hour and seen only a quiet woman in a black dress. She thought about how Carl had sat at her counter for 2 years and ordered his coffee black with no sugar, and she had never once asked him what he was most proud of. She thought she probably would have had a hard time understanding the answer, even if she had asked. Now she thought she might have understood it just fine.